With massive chapters like Alien, Chucky, Castlevania and Five Nights at Freddy's being a thing in Dead by Daylight, one might think that we are running out of big name licenses to hype up the future years, so they have to resort to horror adjacent licenses like D&D and Tomb Raider to fill the gaps. But this is not true at all, and 1 year ago, Behavior released a player satisfaction survey where they asked which license were the participants interested in for the future. This survey contained each license we ended up getting this year besides Child's Play, and there are a lot of popular licenses here. Let's take a look at the horror licenses from that survey that Dead by Daylight is still missing. And let's start with the least likely license to be here, which is also sadly one of the biggest horror icons too, and that's none other than It, also known as Pennywise. This clone was one of the most requested horror characters in the game, and the devs have gone on record various times saying that it is welcome in Dead by Daylight anytime the license holders want it. However, Stephen King, the creator of It, has been very stingy with the license, even more so when related to video games. For that reason, the chances of Pennywise being in the game are quite low, which is surprising considering it was Jason who had that spot, but that doesn't mean that Behavior cannot do miracles, as they have already gotten hard licenses like Nightmare in Elm Street or a license deal with Disney with Alien. Pennywise could have a very unique power based on fear. The map could be the sewers from the end of the books and film, and the survivors could be the adult versions of the Losers Club. There is a lot of potential overall for this chapter. One of the reasons a lot of us are excited for Five Nights at Freddy's coming to DbD is because of how impactful that game became on YouTube during 2014, to the point it completely influenced a lot of other games due to its popularity. Another game that completely shaped the YouTube horror Let's Plays was Outlast, and that's another chapter I would love to see in Dead by Daylight. Outlast was considered, and is still considered by many, to be one of the scariest games ever made. In terms of killer choices, there are various to be made. In terms of purely being the most popular by far, I would have to go with Chris Walker. He would fit perfectly into the game. He even comes with an already composed chase music and terror radius. Hearing the chain noises, as well as his voice lines while he hunts survivors down, would add into the atmosphere. But as previously stated, they could go with Eddie Gluskin, Dr. Trager or Martha if they want Outlast 2 representation. The only issue I find with this collab is that the Outlast team has already made a multiplayer co-op game by the name of Outlast Trials, so this could hinder the chances for this collab, which is sad because various of the characters there could work as legendary skins for the killers we have, like the policeman as a skin for the doctor or Mother Gooseberry as a skin for the twins. However, in terms of shaping the YouTube horror game landscape, there is another game that completely impacted that, the grandfather of both FNAF as well as Outlast, and a game that deserves a spot in the so-called Museum of Horror. That game is Amnesia, a game you will be very familiar with if you watched horror Let's Plays back in the 2010s. Just like Alan Wake, this is a horror cult classic that still impacted the way future horror games would be made. Map-wise, the aesthetic would be something unique for the game, as well as something we have wanted for years, a castle map. The different rooms of the map would make for a very interesting indoor map, similar to RPD. As for the survivor, it would have to be Daniel from The Dark Descent. The only issue is the killer. In my opinion, the Grunt is by far the most recognizable enemy in the game, but that's the point. This is just an enemy and not a special character. The only time this has happened in DbD is with both the Demogorgon and the Xenomorph, as they are not unique in terms of species, but the problem is that Demogorgons and Xenomorphs in itself are a threat, whereas the Servant Grunt is just a common enemy. Remember the amount of noise Stranger Things fans did before the license came back to Dead by Daylight? What happened to it? Because for some reason nobody is talking about the fact that DbD might get a Stranger Things Part 2 once Season 5 comes out, including Vecna as the killer and hopefully Hopper as the survivor. The original DLC was one of the most hyped chapters in the history of the game, only beaten by FNAF in terms of likes and Resident Evil in terms of peak players. But a Stranger Things Part 2 might bring an insane amount of hype to the game, considering that Season 5 is the end of the show. If by the time the show ends and we do not have Hopper in the game, considering that both Steve, Nancy and Jonathan are just secondary characters, is kinda insane. It would be like having Daryl Dixon instead of Rick Grimes or having Pablo instead of Ash Williams. And it's kinda funny how we have the original Vecna instead of the Stranger Things one, but I am sure this will be no problem for the game as they are two completely different characters and we already have killers very similar to each other, like Onryo and Spirit or Hillbilly and Leatherface. If this does not happen, then I think it might be the biggest missed opportunity ever. If you asked me which is the license that I am most surprised is not in Dead by Daylight yet, that has to be Dead Space, a game that shaped the childhood of many of us born in the 2000s. Dead Space was revolutionary for its time, a game where you don't have to shoot the head of the enemies and instead you have to dismember their limbs shot by shot. The Necromorphs are some of the most iconic monsters in video games, as well as some of the scariest, as to this day I still find them creepy. However, I sadly think this chapter would have to be a solo survivor one, because we absolutely need Isaac in the game. The armor design is very recognizable by a lot of gamers even if they never played the game, and the spine health indicator could be used in game in order to show the health status of Isaac while in the trials. Characters like the Resident Evil cast as well as Alucard have shown that overpowered survivors can be toned down inside the entity's realm, and Dead Space has collabed with many other games in the past, as Isaac appears in games like Skate, Fortnite, has done various cameos in other games, and more recently there has been an event in Battlefield 2042 fully inspired on the Dead Space universe. DbD is no stranger to the zombie apocalypse, as we have the Resident Evil as well as the Left 4 Dead chapters in the game. But how about some zombie representation from the big screen? That's where The Walking Dead would come, a show that has impacted mainstream media by a lot, and one of the licenses that the community has asked for the longest. The opportunities for a survivor would be a lot, as they can choose Rick Grimes as the main survivor and have various options like Michonne or Daryl as the legendary cosmetics. I personally think that this chapter fits more as a survivor only license. If they get the license for the entire franchise, they could also attempt to bring survivors from the comics. In terms of possibilities, it's clear that the Walking Dead license holders are very open to licensing this brand, as they have done collabs with Fortnite and Tekken in the past, and Call of Duty more recently. In fact, according to the same person that leaked all of the chapters up to Castlevania, they said that they already contacted Behavior for a chapter. However, this was postponed to a later date, possibly hinting that it's just a matter of time before we get this chapter in the game. If there is one Titan that we are missing, it has to be the Jason Voorhees, by far one of the most popular horror characters along with Myers, Freddy and Leatherface. The devs have made it clear various times that this character will be welcomed with open arms anytime they have the opportunity to get him, and we already know that the license holders of Friday the 13th are all in with the Jason Universe project, which has already added Jason as a playable character in Multiverse and potentially a skin in both Fortnite and Call of Duty. If those games got access to Jason, there is no way the licensed team at Behavior would miss out on the piece of cake. Now, the biggest problem of this license would be if it was actually the March chapter, with only the killer being part of it. Many will agree that this license would need to be a complete chapter, with Tommy Jarvis as the survivor and Camp Crystal Lake as the map, and a massive amount of cosmetics, as Jason could be a licensed killer with the most amount of clothes available, as each movie featured a unique design for him. I firmly believe that this chapter will be here sometime. The only question is how long do we have to wait? And if there is another license that is just a matter of time, then we have the Predator. And I am not talking about Dr. Disrespect. Ever since the release of the Alien chapter, everyone knew that Predator would eventually come to the game, especially due to the Alien vs Predator skin that can already be purchased in-game, which is not from the original Alien films. In fact, it is possible that the March chapter is the Predator itself, as there is a chance they decide to skip on the Arnold license, so they give it in a potential Terminator chapter instead. I also doubt that they are going to design a jungle map entirely for this, as the community already disliked the original version of Dwarka Deepwood. However, as far as I am aware, there have been no leaks regarding this license with the massive Disney leak, which makes it unlikely that this is the March chapter. However, one can pray. Which horror license would you want to see in Dead by Daylight the most? Let me know in the comments and consider dropping a like and subscribing if you're already there. Thank you for watching and have a nice day.